Everything you've ever imagined actually exists. Vampires, fairies, demons, dragons, zombies, aliens. Just like any memory you have, regardless of whether these creatures can be proven to be physical, they very much exist in your imagination, and mine too, and everyone else's. And that means that they have a very real impact on our lives, perspectives, choices, fears, and beliefs. In other words, fictional characters like Cinderella, Prince Charming, the Wicked Witch of the West, and Spike from Buffy are archetypal in nature. These are examples of strongly familiar, recurring symbols in our culture, and as such, they live in what Jung called the collective unconscious, and therefore also in our individual psyches, as parts of the personality that can inform the way we develop, what we believe ourselves capable or worthy of, how we think we should behave, etc., etc. Why do you need to know this? Because unless you become aware of these symbols, unless you make the unconscious conscious, as Jung is so often quoted to have said, these archetypes can control you without you even knowing it's happening. By the way, my name's Hazel Gale. I'm a former therapist turned author and creator of the fantasy mental health game Betwixt, which is where you'll find all of my best and most creative tools for self-awareness building. And I've been spending a lot of time lately looking into where and how archetypes show up in modern life. Because as K.M. Weiland writes in her brilliant book, Writing Archetypal Character Arcs, when they do show up, and that is often, they come shrouded in resonant truths and undeniable moral lessons that can straight up change our lives. Archetypes speak to us and through us. Once a story touches on the archetypal, it stops just being about some character's journey of change and starts to be about our own journey of change. Archetypal stories create, or at least offer, transformation for the reader. Now, there is one archetypal story that you have definitely heard of before, and that's the hero's journey. Made famous by Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, the hero's journey is so commonplace that it's almost become synonymous with story itself. And it's easy to see why. Not only is the hero's journey a damn satisfying story, but it's also about the character type that our culture reveres above all others. Patriarchy loves the hero's journey because it promotes all of patriarchy's favourite values. Individualism, saviorism, achievement, battling, conquering objective evil, and probably winning the affections of some pretty damsel in the process. Perfect. But here's the thing. The hero's journey is not the only archetypal character arc. It isn't even the most important one. As Weiland lays out in her book, and as Jungian theorists and psychologists have known for over 100 years, the hero is but one of many equally important archetypes present in the human psyche and active in our lives. The deal is this. If we get to know and embrace these archetypes, they will act as our guides in life. Deny, repress, or otherwise ignore them, however, and they will possess us, but not in their healthy forms, but as their darker, more destructive shadow versions. But don't worry, this series of videos is here to kit you out with all you need to stop that from happening. We're simplifying things a little bit though, and focusing on the 6 archetypal journeys that K.M. Weiland maps onto the archetypal human life story, and that correspond to other theories and systems, including Jung's archetypes, Campbell's stages of the hero's transformation, and Erikson's stages of human development. Our 6 archetypes come in 3 pairs. First, the maiden and the hero, who cover the youngest third of the archetypal life. Then, the queen and the king, who represent midlife. And then the crone and the mage for old age. Importantly, although these names are gendered, we can all walk all of these paths regardless of how we identify. And in fiction, these archetypal parts can and are played by people of any gender. I'm going to propose gender-neutral names for these archetypes a little bit later in the series, but for now, let's stick with the gendered versions. The story arcs connected to the archetypes we're exploring are what Weiland calls positive change story arcs. This means that, just like the hero, each of these archetypes has a particular journey of transformation to take. For example, the maiden's coming-of-age story is all about flying the nest of a familiar world, working out who they are as an individual, and entering the big, bad, real world. The hero is a call to adventure that sees the protagonist battle not only an external evil, but their own inner demons too. The queen's is a call to empowering, responsible leadership. The king's is an epic encounter with humility, self-sacrifice, and the natural cycles of life. The crone, my absolute favourite, is a journey into the underworld to reckon with our mortality and to be reborn after metaphorical/psychological death. And the mage's adventure sees him confronted by the challenges of morality, responsible use of power and wisdom, and going out having lived a quote-unquote good life. Importantly, as positive change arcs, these stories are not about becoming the archetype in question, but about arcing out of it and into the next. The hero's journey then is not about becoming the hero, but about transcending hero and stepping into queen. And in order to achieve such growth, we of course will need some kind of friction or conflict. And therefore each of these journeys comes complete with 2 archetypal antagonists and virtually universal challenges. In my opinion, most interestingly, they're also each trailed by 2 shadow archetypes, a passive one and an aggressive one, that threaten to drag them over to the dark side. And here's why all of this is so important. We will each live versions of all of these stories for ourselves, sometimes in big, obvious, complete ways, and probably more often in a kind of micro fashion, taking a maiden or hero's journey at work, for example, while also living a queen's story at home. And as mentioned, if we do this without awareness of the archetypes, then we open the door to the shadow versions. And this means that the fact that we've culturally downgraded all of the other archetypes in order to venerate the hero, essentially relegating them to the unconscious, is a big problem. The hero has a black and white perspective on life. He needs to fight, dominate, and overcome in order to complete his arc. And he has to do it all on his own. When in combination with the other archetypes, this is entirely healthy. A necessary part of individuation, which is the process of learning who we are and how to assert our individuality in the world, which we all need to do in our younger lives. But when we over-identify with the hero, as our culture strongly urges us to do, things get out of whack, and it can lead us towards an aggressive, us versus them, good versus bad, combative outlook on life. Not to mention an unconscious tendency towards the assumption of male supremacy, misogyny, and disregard for things like human connection and interdependence that oppose the hero's individualism. In short, this is not a good idea. And yet, if you take a look at the headlines of pretty much any newspaper out there, you'll see that this dualistic us versus them perspective is not only something that affects us at the individual level, but en masse too. In the words of Carol Pearson, as a culture, we have become possessed by the hero archetype, and this is harming us greatly. So how can we awaken the others? Well, we simply need to learn about them and tell their stories more often. It all starts with awareness, by bringing these parts of the personality out of the shadow realms of the unconscious and into the light of conscious awareness. We can transform them from dark puppet masters into very positive, helpful guides and teachers. So if you want to join me on this journey into the depths of your psyche and to meet and awaken these archetypes that live there, here's what I suggest you do. Pick one of these archetypes to give some attention to, preferably not the hero, before we get stuck in with the next video. See what you gravitate towards right now. Watch one of these movies if you like, and just have a think about that character as an archetype, as a representation of a part of your personality and mind. And see if you can answer this question. What is it that your chosen archetype has to teach us? What's the moral of their story? As always, I really hope this helps, and I would love to hear your ideas for what these archetypes have to say in the comments. And if you'd like to take an epic adventure through a magical world in the name of personal growth, then you can download the narrative self-exploration game Betwixt, which you can find on the iOS App Store and Google Play.